My main role this morning is chairing and to introduce the speakers who are contributing. So we are honoured to have as our speakers the First Minister of Wales, the University Vice-Chancellor, the Director of Baxu Cymru, and the Head of the School of History, Philosophy and Social Sciences. Charlotte and I will be talking about the background to the book and some of the themes from the book a little bit later. So each speaker has roughly 10 minutes to speak. So now it's time for me to call our first speaker this morning, the Vice-Chancellor of Bangor University, Professor Iwan Davies. He will open the event with an official welcome on behalf of the university.
Wel, bore da chi gyd a chroeso. Pleser o'r mwyaf i groesawu chi gyd yn rhythiol i'r lansiad o'r trydydd argraffiad o'r gyfrol safonol Social Policy for Welfare Practice in Wales dan olygyddiaeth Hefin Gwilym, Prifysgol Bangor, a'r athro Charlotte Williams, athro anrydeddus yma ym Mhrifysgol Bangor. What a joy it is to welcome you to the launch of this third edition of the book, Social Policy for Welfare Practice in Wales, edited by Dr. Hefin Gwilym and Professor Charlotte Williams. I've got to say that the world is certainly flat, as Charlotte is joining the event today live from Adelaide, Australia, where she's been in lockdown since retiring as professor at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. I warmly welcome the First Minister of Wales, the Right Honourable Professor Mark Drakeford, to this event. And thank you, First Minister. Diolch i chi am yr amser o sgrifennu man cynta i'r llyfr yma. We really welcome you and also are grateful for taking the time to write the foreword to what is now an established contribution to the understanding of social policy in Wales. You've done so, I would say, not as much as First Minister, but as a researcher and teacher of social policy in Wales, where you have in earlier editions contributed insightful chapters. As First Minister, I would, on behalf of the whole education sector, express our gratitude as well to the outstanding leadership you have shown in yesterday's announcement of the new International Learning Education Programme, which offers to Wales, both for students and staff, opportunities for students to be internationally mobile through study or work. This is social policy at work, reflecting the imperative of Wales as an outward-looking and competitive nation, requiring as such a skilled workforce with a global outlook. Speaking as Vice-Chancellor of Bangor University, we are also grateful to the commitment you have shown towards the vision of the university and Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board to support the development of a school of medicine and health for North Wales. We are determined that as a matter of social policy, that this is a collaborative development which will inform education, skills portfolio, service development, improve health outcomes, and drive economic ambition here in North Wales. I am proud of the work of social sciences in Bangor. The social sciences have had a home at Bangor University since the mid-1960s, and there's always been a strong social policy presence here, partly, of course, in response to the needs of local employers in social work and other professions, and to address through research and teaching some of the challenging social problems that have existed in this area over the years. One of the leading research centres in Wales, the Institute of Social and Economic Research and Data, has a base here in Bangor University. Bangor has an important role in social policy development in Wales. The concept of cynefin, which defines our identity, and the many histories which have combined to shape Wales today are a matter of focus to the academic and wider community here at the university. And the university community is global and extends today, of course, to Adelaide. I'm delighted that Charlotte is chairing the working group in promoting what I think will be perhaps one of the greatest legacies of this Welsh Government, namely the progressive new curriculum here for Wales, advancing as it does Black and minority ethnic history, identity and culture into the everyday learning of every child in Wales. As a lawyer, I'm acutely aware of the significance of the devolution settlement and the significance of this in promoting genuinely a devolution dividend for the people of Wales. And this must be rooted in the opportunities it affords in promoting the expression of our own social policy. Some of the challenges are highlighted in the volume launched today. This would not have been possible without the support of Alison Hulmes, the National Director for Cymru at the British Association of Social Workers, which has published the book. BASW's support of publications in Wales for Wales is critically important for social workers and to the policy and practitioner community. Diolch I Hefin ac I Charlotte am I holl waith ac am drefnu y gyfrol bwysig yma. In the light of all of our challenges, and speaking from the perspective of Bangor University and also of the people of Wales, what contributors to this volume reminds us is that to become the best, we need to focus on our shared potential and not on our limits. Diolch yn fawr iawn a chroeso mawr i'r gyfrol bwysig yma, Social Policy for Welfare Practice in Wales. Rwy'n hanner o falch I groesawu y gyfrol yma fel isganghellor Prifysgol Bangor. Diolch I chi.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Isganghellor. Thank you, Vice-Chancellor, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule this morning to greet and welcome everyone to this event. Thank you very much indeed. Diolch yn fawr. Now I call on Professor Peter Shapley as head of the School of History, Philosophy and Social Sciences to say a few words on behalf of the school, which is the current home of social policy at the university.
Thank you, Hefin, and a warm welcome to everybody. I'd like to reiterate the Vice-Chancellor's welcome to you all on behalf of the School of History, Philosophy and Social Sciences to launch this book, the third edition of Social Policy for Welfare Practice in Wales, as we know, edited by Hefin and Charlotte and published by the British Association of Social Workers. So first of all, I'd like to really congratulate Hefin and Charlotte for this excellent jointly edited volume, now a standard text, and to all the contributors, a number of which are actually directly connected to the school. And I think it's a sign of the quality of social sciences over the years in the School of History, Philosophy and Social Sciences. A special warm welcome to the First Minister of Wales, Professor Mark Drakeford, especially given your current workload with COVID and the election. We really appreciate you taking time out to join us today. Mark is, of course, no stranger to the social policy community, as the Vice-Chancellor has pointed out, having in the past contributed extensively to social policy and social work literature. As the Professor of Social Policy at Cardiff University, author of several books, and editor of one of the leading journals, the British Journal of Social Work from 2000 to 2004. So welcome, First Minister, and again, many, many thanks for attending. We really appreciate it. So now I'd just like to say a few things about social sciences and the school. And the Vice-Chancellor is quite right to be proud of the contribution of our staff in the school. The school has actually been teaching social science, or social policy rather, since 1972, when the social policy degree was introduced as a joint honours pathway along with sociology. Our undergraduate modules encompass areas of poverty and diversity, and the social policy and sociology degrees are available in both English medium and Welsh medium. And I think the thing about social policy and sociology at Bangor is we're very much driven by exclusive, or the need for an inclusive society, the need for progressive politics, the kind of things that are actually raised, the kind of issues raised in this volume. In recent years, we've supervised a range of excellent PhDs on relevant social policy topics, including food banks in Wales by Dave Beck. David is now a lecturer at Salford and has actually contributed a chapter on poverty to the book. And he's also given advice in the past to the Welsh Assembly on food banks. Now, we've mentioned, the Vice-Chancellor's already mentioned internationalisation. And internationalisation is something we are very, very keen to develop. Hefin is actually our international officer as well. And we welcome Mark's commitment to support the ideal across the HE sector. Thanks to Hefin, along with universities in Austria, Poland and Finland, the school is a partner in an Erasmus-funded international programme called the Empire Project, but the Empire spelled with a Y, which is quite important. The outcome will be a web-based course on youth work available throughout the UK and the European Union. The scheme employs one of our own PhD students and supports 6 undergraduate students who are all interested in possible careers in youth work after they've graduated. The school is also closely involved with the HEFCU Coleg Cymraeg project in creating Welsh medium digital resources for sociology in higher education. Bangor is taking the lead in the project that includes academics from Aberystwyth University and Cardiff University. The project is designed to ensure that Welsh speakers studying social sciences at university have access to bespoke digital resources, especially significant because of our experiences over the last year, of course, in moving our teaching and learning online. We're also leading on a Welsh medium A-level resource project. A series of cartoon multimedia ebooks have already been created with the help of Hugh Aaron, Wales's best known cartoonist. These, and they are very entertaining resources, have been created to try to encourage more pupils to study sociology A-level in Welsh. At present, there's a clear shortage of resources in this area, and it is hoped that these multimedia resources will give both pupils the confidence to choose to study the subject in Welsh, but also it will empower teachers to teach the subject in Welsh to students as well. Now, as this book demonstrates, as Hefin and Charlotte's book demonstrates, we carry out leading research across the school in social sciences. And we are very proud to be one of the bases for the Welsh Institute for Social and Economic Research and Data, or WIZARD, as we love to call it. Our particular contribution is as the home of the Civil Society Research Centre, and we've been involved in large and prestigious ESRC awards on civil society. The Civic Stratification and Civil Repairs project seeks understanding of how civil society is affected by forms of civil exclusion and expansion, civic loss and gain. And it's also looking at the potential for civil society organisations in terms of how they might play a key role in civic repair. So very much looking at the kind of things like Putnam and Bowling Alone, you know, the importance of civil organisations and civil society in creating stable and sustainable communities. Alongside this, the Centre is carrying out research on many of the key challenges facing society, especially important, of course, in the post-lockdown world, such as social and economic inequality, political polarisation and disengagement, migration and multiculturalism, the changing dynamics of work and the gig economy, and the impact of new technological innovations. The Centre has a local and national focus, but it has also been very successful in creating international links. All of this research underpins our own REF submission. We're going into the REF this year with a very strong sociology unit for the first time. That's how well sociology and the social sciences have done over recent years. They're now in a much stronger position, and we're able to enter through the sociology unit of assessment. And I think, again, this reflects the strengths that we have across the school, because many of us, even non-social scientists, will be part of that REF submission. And moving forward, we will continue to promote and support social sciences. And indeed, a summer merger with the law school will provide us with even greater opportunity for exciting collaborations, especially with criminology. So I'd like to conclude by again congratulating Hefin and Charlotte and all the contributors. I'd like to thank the organisers, and of course, I wish the new book every success. Thank you very much, and thank you again, everyone, for being here today.
Thank you very much, Peter. Much appreciated. Thanks very much. And now we're going to have a bit of a closer look at the book. Charlotte and I are going to talk a little bit about the background to the book and some of the main themes that are coming out of the book. And Charlotte is going to start this particular session. So over to you, Charlotte, in Adelaide.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr Hefin. And can I add my thanks to Vice Chancellor, Professor Iwan Davies, First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, Alison Humes as Director of BASU Cymru, and to Peter, who we've just heard from as Head of School of History, Philosophy and Social Sciences. And I was one of those social policy students in the school all those years ago. Bore da i pawb, and particularly bore da to the social work community out there who I know are interested and supporting the launch of this third edition of the book. I'd like to give you a little bit of a background to this third edition and how it came about. And I endorse what the Vice-Chancellor said about BASU Cymru being foresighted in recognising the need for a book that was Wales-focused post-devolution. And BASU didn't actually approach me initially, but they approached that very eminent scholar who you have just heard about, Mark Drakeford, to take forward this project. And Mark, busy as he was even back then in writing and in his work with the British Journal of Social Work and so on, very nicely contacted me and said, would I be willing to take this project forward? And I was, and the rest is history. 2007 edition and the 2011 edition, with a great range of contributors, of which Mark was one, and very important in writing on health policy and governance and so on. And of course, my wonderful collaborator, Hefin Gwilym, was there right from the beginning. And therefore, when BASU approached me about a third edition, it was an obvious choice to turn to Hefin as co-editor to take forward this new edition some 10 years on from the last. But back then, it was very interesting. We were making a case back in the 2007, which had a very boring cover, I must say. We were making a case for Welsh distinctiveness, which now is an established fact, I'm proud to say. And we were using words like experiment and lab and trial and test case, and of course, clear red water. And part of the kind of strapline of the first book was Welsh solutions for Welsh problems. And that has remained important. But another interesting thing about the early edition was that as academics, we were trying to really find our place vis-a-vis government, and perhaps a kind of the place of a critical friend, with some ambivalence about perhaps being absorbed into government and being too celebratory about self-government in Wales, and wanting to sort of stand back and let the research speak, and being able to point out challenges as well as proposals and so on. And I think the third edition really reflects that confidence. Hefin has really put his own stamp on this edition, which is marvellous. With a comprehensive range of chapters, he's sort of extended the policy field in very interesting ways to include contributions that weren't there before. And he's engaged some 19 of us as contributors and authors, and many people are new contributors, which is really good to see and really heartening to know that they're going to take the work forward. And of course, we start a book like this always by celebrating some of the Made in Wales features in particular, and some of the most distinctive departures, and there are many. For example, organ donorship, free transport and free prescriptions and free parking in hospitals for people like me, cheap tuition fees or cheaper tuition fees, and the abolition of the right to buy, harmful drinking regulation, to name a few, and including this week's development in education, as the Vice-Chancellor mentioned, the work that we are doing on the new curriculum. And I feel it's been a double celebration for me this week, having the 51 proposals that we put forward in the report to the Minister of Education accepted. And we've just got to make that work now. And I must note to ourselves, Hevin, there must be a chapter on education the next time we do this book. In terms of the chapters, what connects the chapters for me, I think, is this strong endorsement of the social justice concerns of the Welsh Government, with this focus on citizen rights, representation, participation in decision-making, and broad redistributive measures. And those principles sort of shine through across the chapters. Many of the authors talking about collaboration and participation in public provision, and particularly the willingness of our government to identify social structural causality in the nature of individual people's distress. And that's very, very important to us in the current moment. Also, many of the chapters note some of the restrictions that are placed as a result of lack of comprehensive fiscal powers, the fact that we don't have a governance over social security in particular. And several of us in our chapters speak about what we call the implementation gap, that very, very tough nut to crack between policy intent and policy action in practice. And of course, several of us note perhaps impending austerity as a result of Brexit as being a worry as we go forward. But as the book indicates, Wales has a great imagination for innovation in policy and practice. And this values-led policy arena is really coming of age, and it's wonderful to see that, and it's wonderful to record and give an account of that in the book. Finally, I just wanted to say, as a social worker myself and a social work educator, I think a book like this, if I may be allowed to say so, is so valuable in that it's homegrown, in that it's relevant, and in that it's very accessible to the average practitioner. So I hope that they will engage with it. And I hope, and I want to thank BASU very much for their continuing support of this edition. So over to you, Hevin.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charlotte. It was great working with you, obviously, on the book. I have known Charlotte now since 1995, when I did the social work diploma at Bangor University. Charlotte was one of the lecturers, and she has been a mentor and a support and ever since. So it was wonderful working with Charlotte, and particularly we had to rely a lot on her experience as an editor. But I do want to reiterate some of her points, that we try to cover some of the traditional areas of social policy in the book, such as poverty and child poverty, and we have chapters on each of those areas. But we also try to introduce new themes. So for the first time, we have a new chapter on housing. We also have a chapter on climate change, which we think is really important. It's going to be a big challenge for social policy in Wales in the future, one of the most important issues that we are facing globally, of course. And we've also got a chapter this time on criminal justice, which we thought needed to be included in the book. And yes, I agree with Charlotte. The next time we need to include education, and we need to include a chapter on Brexit. We've tried to address Brexit as best as we can. We don't fully know what the outcome of Brexit is going to be, but there are areas for concern already. So it was a wonderful experience working with Charlotte on the book, and a great pleasure. Now then, next it's a great honour for me to call on the First Minister of Wales, Professor Mark Drakeford, to address us this morning. It is, of course, an extremely busy time for Mark as First Minister in leading the Welsh Government response to the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown measures. It is a huge testament to his commitment over the years to social policy and social work academia that he has been able to find time to join us this morning. I'm sure that we are all very grateful to him for making the time to be here. I know that Charlotte and I are particularly grateful to Mark, not only for the forward to the book, but also for attending this launch this morning. So over to you, First Minister.
Wel, Hefin, diolch yn fawr I chi, diolch am y wahoddiad I gyfrannu at y lawnsiad bore yma, a llongyfarchiadau mawr I pob un sydd wedi bod rhan o'r prosiect I gyhoeddi y trydydd argraffiad o'r llyfr sydd wedi bod yn bwysig dros y cyfnod o ddatganoli I gyd. Thank you very much indeed for the chance to be with you this morning. It is a tremendous achievement to see a third edition of a book which I think has been part of the devolution journey. And this volume brings it completely up to date. Great to be with you, Hefin, and particularly great to be with Charlotte, who, remarkably, from Adelaide, continues to make an enormous contribution to the development of our social policy thinking here in Wales. Not only with the book, of which she has been a driving force over the whole of the 3 editions, but as many of you will have seen, the report that she and her team published on Black history in the teaching of that experience here in Wales. The Welsh Government was very pleased indeed to be able to accept all the recommendations, and some of you will have seen the very positive coverage of the report over the weekend in The Guardian and in other places. So a special pleasure to be here with you today. On the rear cover of the book, another good friend, Professor Neil Thompson, refers to this edition as confirming both the distinctive nature of social policy in Wales and its importance. And I want to make that a bit of the theme of what I want to say today. I should also pay tribute to BASW, as others have done. Many of us on this call, I know, will have been members of BASW over the years and put in the hours to make a contribution there as well. I was for a number of years a member of the publications committee of BASW, back and forth to Kent Street in Birmingham, trying to make sure that in that publication programme, the interests of Wales were always properly understood. And BASW Cymru was always a great supporter of that. And this latest edition, its relevance and its accessibility, as Charlotte said, for social work students and social work practitioners in Wales. It's a genuine contribution that BASW has made to the profession here in Wales, and the third edition is a really concrete example of the commitment that BASW Cymru has shown over the 2 decades of devolution. Now, when I had the privilege of seeing an early version of the book in order to contribute an introduction, the thing that struck me was what a step forward the edition demonstrates in the development of the profession here in Wales. Those people who are involved in the research, the publication, the teaching on social policy and social welfare practice. back then, as Charlotte said, I vividly remember when we were working on that first edition, just how hard we had to work, those of us who were contributing chapters, to make the case for a separate and distinctive social policy agenda in Wales. It absolutely couldn't be taken for granted during the early part of that first decade. Time and time again, we were having to make the case for a social policy that was intrinsically and distinctively Welsh. Here, contributors are, to a large extent, able to take that for granted. 20 years on, you don't have to do such a heavy lifting job of persuading people that there is a Welsh story to tell. So the distinctiveness, I think, is absolutely demonstrated in the pages of the edition. Personally, I was so pleased to see a chapter on housing. One of the 5 giants of the Beveridge report, but a branch of social policy which I know distinguished researchers in the field have argued that in many ways the Thatcher reforms of the 1980s and the 1990s removed housing as a theme of social policy interest. It had simply been handed over to the market and there was no public policy interest left in the housing field. Well, that's never been true in Wales, and it's increasingly not true. And to find a chapter in the book recapturing housing as a field for social policy inquiry and reporting, I thought was a great addition to the breadth and the scope of the latest edition, with all those 19 contributors, so many of them new, so many of them gifted in the way that they analyse developments here in Wales. Now, for me as well, and maybe this is just my own view, and I'm sure there will be contributors to the book who take a different emphasis, but the other distinguishing feature of social policy in Wales has been its applied nature. That people who collect the evidence, do the analysis, build the theory, do so because they think of social policy as a discipline that makes a difference in the lives of Welsh citizens. And when I was myself more a practitioner in this field, that's what always motivated me. I wanted to be involved in research and writing where I thought there was a fighting chance that would then make a difference in either the way that practitioners went about their jobs or governments went about the business of formulating and then trying to implement policy. It was vividly brought home to me, Hefin, in the very early years of devolution. I was an external examiner in Bangor at the time for the social policy undergraduate degree. And I was reading essays with titles such as "Why did Edwina Hart establish the Communities First programme?" within weeks of having been sitting in the room with the minister while she was making those final decisions. And that sense of an academic community and a policy community that are connected to the challenging world of making a difference in people's lives, I think has been a really distinctive part of the way that the profession in Wales has seen the job that it does. And for me, long may that continue. Now, beyond this edition, there is a 4th edition waiting to be written, focusing on the extraordinary last 12 months. 12 months in which we will have left the European Union, to the great regret of many of us, but with profound implications for social policy making and practice here in Wales, and in which we have dealt with the enormous challenges of a global pandemic, an extraordinary year in which we have used extraordinary powers I honestly think that, a year ago when the UK government decided that we would rely on the devolved powers in each part of the United Kingdom as the essential framework for responding to the pandemic, I think they had very little idea of the extent to which those powers would lead to distinctive decision-making across the 4 nations of the United Kingdom, because they've been extraordinary powers and they've been extraordinarily applied. And there is a volume waiting to be written looking at exactly how all that happened, alongside all the other things the government goes on doing all the time. And as Charlotte said, we've only just, in the closing weeks of this Senedd term, been able to complete the only reform of local government that has been managed in 20 years of devolution. And, I think when the dust settles, I think people will come to realise what an achievement that has been and what a radical piece of legislation that is, alongside the curriculum reform bill, finally completing all its Senedd term stages and waiting now for its royal assent. All of that will be meat and drink for social policy analysts and writers, and all of it makes a difference to social welfare practice in Wales. And that work continues right up to the last minute. I was very pleased indeed last week to be able to confirm this government's commitment to a medical school for North Wales, both because that will give us an opportunity to create the workforce of the future, but it will allow us to create a workforce for the future in a genuinely bilingual nation, where people's ability to receive a service in the language of their choice will be, I think, very significantly enhanced by that development. And over the weekend, I can't tell you how cheered up I have been by the imagination, the inventiveness, and the speed with which our successor programme to Erasmus Plus has been put together here in Wales and is now funded for the whole of the next Senedd term, making sure that Wales goes on being an outward-looking nation engaged with the opportunities that our young people will now have in all parts of the world, not just Europe, but in other parts of the world as well. Having only a couple of weeks ago, I took part in an event about the Seren programme. I was joined by young people from Wales studying in Harvard, Yale, Chicago, and Princeton. And it was on St. David's Day, and it was just cheered you up so much to see those incredibly bright young people. One of them, Mohammed, a young man from my own constituency, a second-generation Bangladeshi young man. His family came from rural Bangladesh. They live right in the middle of Cardiff, in the riverside area of the city. And there he was in Harvard, president of the Harvard Overseas Students Association, and with a Welsh flag pinned to the wall behind him. And that's what we want our Erasmus successor programme to be, a window for our young people into the world and a chance to welcome young people from the world here to Wales. And that's the sort of Wales we want, and that's the sort of Wales I think that forms the background to the sort of social policy that is analysed, sometimes celebrated, sometimes quite rightly, the challenges in the path of doing what we wanted to do brought to the surface as well. So I'll end by agreeing once again with Charlotte. The chapters are worth reading for their own intrinsic interest, but they are particularly worth reading because of the difference that they can make. A difference to the social workers who are being trained in Bangor and in other universities and colleges across Wales, to those people who are responsible for the management and delivery of our social welfare services, and for government and those of us who try to learn the lessons of evidence gathering and analysis and put that to work in the distinctive business of creating a social policy that is fit for the people here in Wales. So diolch yn fawr unwaith eto I chi gyd ar yr ymdrech am popeth chi wedi wneud, am y cyfraniad ni'n gallu weld am pob tudalen o'r llyfr ac am y wahaniaeth mae'r llyfr yn mynd I wneud I ni gyd yn y dyfodol.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn, First Minister, for sharing with us and inspiring us to think ambitiously about Welsh social policy. There is no doubt that you have made a considerable contribution to the Welsh radical tradition in social policy, in government and as an academic. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi, Mark. Thank you very much, Mark.
Diolch.
Now I would like to call Alison Humes to speak on behalf of the publishers of Social Policy for Welfare Practice in Wales, the British Association of Social Workers, BASW. Alison is herself a social worker and is currently director of BASW Cymru. BASW is the professional organisation, of course, representing social workers, and we are very fortunate in its role as a publisher. It has published numerous volumes covering many aspects of professional social work, and it is responsible for the leading academic social work journal, the British Journal of Social Work. So Alison, over to you.
Diolch, Hefin. Bore da pawb. Diolch, thank you for inviting me this morning. Before I start, I would just firstly like to thank the First Minister for the recognition payment being awarded to health and social care workers for their essential service during this last year. So diolch yn fawr iawn, First Minister. So I'm honoured, absolutely honoured to be at the launch of the third edition of this really important BASW publication, Social Policy for Welfare Practice in Wales. And I'd like to offer my congratulations to the editors, to Charlotte and to Hefin, and also to the contributors. I myself refer to previous editions and frequently refer to previous editions, so I'm really happy to get this latest one, and I of course recommend enthusiastically the additions to social workers and students throughout Wales, but of course throughout the UK too. It's especially gratifying to me to see so many familiar names amongst the contributors whom I've had the pleasure of collaborating and working alongside for a number of years now. Each contributor is extending the knowledge and evidence base which is absolutely essential for ethical social work to happen. My own social work journey started in the year that Wales became a devolved nation. So my social work story has been shaped, formed and informed by an evolving social policy and legislative landscape. Each of us, I think, is representative of a Ffordd Gymraeg, the Welsh way. The important story of the mechanisms and levers needed to support a Wales growing in independence and confidence requires regular reflection, analysis and appraisal, and each edition of this book has allowed this to happen. I am grateful that BASW continues to support this process. I consider myself a social work activist, true to my codes of ethics and values. So I'm pleased to see social justice, human rights and equality feature so prominently in this third edition. The last 10 years have been especially difficult, and social workers have directly witnessed the impact of welfare reform, which brought with it deepening poverty and disadvantage to those whom they support and stand alongside. During this time, Welsh Government has made ethical and moral policy and legislative changes in order to mitigate some of the worst effects of austerity. Approaches based on principles of fairness and equality. People first and foremost. A Ffordd Gymraeg, the Welsh way. As the First Minister has already said, the last year has been extraordinary in so many ways, with the passing of emergency coronavirus legislation and a fertile social policy landscape. In my role as National Director for Wales, I have scrutinised, commented on and given evidence about the impact of the changes as they occur. Not something I could have anticipated when taking up this role 2 years ago. What is abundantly clear is that the social policy and constitutional story of Wales is a dynamic one, now more so than ever. and one that is still unfolding. So I look forward to many future generations, many future editions, which will continue to tell our social policy story in Wales. Llongyfarchiadau, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch yn fawr, Alison. Thank you very much indeed. And now we're drawing the event to a close. So finally, I would just like to express some thanks. Both Charlotte and I would like to communicate our thanks to some of the people who have helped through the process of publishing social policy for welfare practice in Wales and for organising this morning's event. First, we would like to thank Sue Hatton, the BASW editor. Sue was extremely hardworking right the way through the process. And also, we would like to thank the publishers for developing the idea of a social policy book on Wales. Thanks to all the academics and practitioners who have committed to writing chapters for the book in very difficult circumstances because of COVID-19. And thanks to Nerys Bogan and Gwen Sean for their hard work in organising and marketing this event this morning. And we would like to thank all the people, all of you who have attended this morning, and particularly thank you to our Vice Chancellor, to the First Minister of Wales, to Head of School, and to Charlotte as well for joining us, and Alison, thank you very much indeed. I'd like to thank everybody. Finally, just a word to thank both our families, Charlotte and I and my family, for their continued support throughout this process and ongoing. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd am ddod y bore yma a pob llwyddiant i bawb yn y dyfodol.